Hi everyone, Cassie here from Primrose Dawn, and today I'm going to share with you a pattern hack for turning the Delvine Bralette into a long line bra with extra support. So let's go over the design details. We will be working with front C, which has the keyhole opening with cups made of lace over the self fabric, and we will be extending the cradle down into a long line bra and adding some extra seams. And we will be adding a lace overlay with the self fabric behind. And we will be using back J, which I haven't drawn. That's just the plain band for the back. So let's go over the details of what we will be changing. We're going to lengthen the cradle in the back and make it longer. We're going to add seams at the center front so that we can make a lace overlay that comes to a point. And we're going to also add some princess seams, which we will add some boning for support. And we're also going to add boning along the sides. This will provide some stability. And we're going to make a cut and sew foam cup using the lace overlay for fronts D and E. And we'll put this behind the main fabric so you won't be able to see it, but this will provide some extra coverage behind the cups. And we're also going to add some channeling along the cradle and front seam, and that's going to add some support. This bralette was not designed to be used with wires, but there are some measures we can take to increase the support. Let's talk about the materials that we will be using. I have this non-stretch lace that I thought would be perfect for this project. It's really delicate, has this sort of eyelash edge, and it doesn't stretch at all. This is a rigid lace. And for the main fabric, I picked out this magenta dazzle fabric, which does have some widthwise stretch, but since we're using a stable lace, that's going to prevent stretch in the cups. So I'm not too worried about this having some stretch in it. It doesn't have any lengthwise stretch. All the stretch is in the width. So I think that'll be okay. And for the back band, I'm going to use some Tech Sheen, which is just has a little bit of a different look than Power Knit. It doesn't really have the mesh holes, but it's pretty firm, nice and not too stretchy. So that'll provide a good amount of support. And then this is some cut and sew foam that we're going to make our foam cup out of. And I just wanted to briefly mention the trims. We just have all the usual bra trims here. We have 1/2-inch strap elastic, fold over elastic, channeling, 3/4 inch plush elastic. And this is one you might not have seen before. Instead of using a heat sealed pre-cut hook and eye closure, this is hook and eye tape. And for any style of bra, this is what I prefer to use. I have really sensitive skin, and sometimes the heat sealed edges of the pre-cut hook and eyes are a little irritating to me. And the nice thing about the hook and eye tape is that all the edges are soft, and you just finish them either with some straight stitches or zigzag stitches around the edge. And maybe it doesn't look as pretty as the heat sealed edges, but I find it much more comfortable. And since we're increasing the length of the cradle and the back band, we're going to need a much longer hook and eye closure. So using hook and eye tape is probably the easiest because we can customize how long the back opening is where this hook and eye closure will go. I have one more trim I didn't show you earlier, and this is the boning that we will be adding into the cradle. As you can see, this is just plastic boning inside a casing. I don't know a whole lot about boning. It's been a long time since I've added it into a project. From what I've heard, spiral steel boning is much more comfortable than this type of plastic boning. So if you plan on using boning in a lot of your projects, you might want to look into spiral steel boning as opposed to plastic. Okay, so let's begin by altering our pattern pieces. I'm going to start with the cradle and the back. This is cradle G. This does not have the lace edge. This is just the turned back bottom. And this is the plain back band for back J. So the first thing I'm going to do is add the princess line, and I'm going to add it at the lowest point of the cup, which looks to be about here. And I'm going to make this, try and make it perpendicular to the seam. And I'm going to cut it apart. So since there's going to be a seam there, we're going to have to add some seam allowance. I'm going to put these a little bit far apart from each other, but still keep them in line. Okay, so try and keep these bottoms aligned because we're going to add length. And tape it down. This paper that I'm using is just a roll of craft paper that I bought at a school supply store. Oops, see, I moved my piece. You can get special pattern making paper that has, sort of a grid. I find it a little bit expensive, and this white craft paper works just as well for me as any other paper. Okay, just taping these pieces down to secure them. So I like to add a reminder to myself to add seam allowance. And since we're going to be adding some lace overlays, we're also going to need to add some seam allowance along the front. This is no longer going to be on the fold. So let's add a reminder to add seam allowance there. This side seam already has seam allowance, so we don't need to add any there. So let's decide how much length we want to add. And I kind of measured on myself. I think I'm going to add 2.5 inches for the length. Now my torso is sort of shaped like a column. There's only a 1 inch difference between my underbust measurement and my waist measurement. So I don't need to make it go in a whole lot. The longer you make it, the more you're going to have to adjust for your waist measurement. So compare your measurements to, take some circumference measurements on your body, figure out how long you want to make the long line and bralette and where the bottom elastic is going to land, and then measure around your body at that length. So I'm going to add 2.5 inches. I'm going to continue along this line. Do the same over here. 2.5 inches. Along the front as well. And then we're going to continue the same shaping for this side. And I'm not measuring that just yet. I need to tape down the side seam, don't I? Don't want that flopping around. Okay. Let's continue adding 2.5 inches. That wasn't right. Is that right? Yes. 2.5 inches. Fill that in. If you have a French curve, I want to fill that in with the French curve. I'm just freehanding it. And now we'll also want to add 2.5 inches to the back band. I'm going to take this piece down. Continue that line down. Let's figure out 2.5 inches. I guess I could have measured down exactly 2.5 inches. Connect these. Okay, so earlier I showed you my hook and eye tape. I'm going to get it out again. We need to take a look at this center back piece here, because we want to make sure that when we cut our hook and eye, it's not going to be an odd place. See, also to mark in the elastic allowance. Okay, so we're using 3/4 inch elastic, so I'm marking up 3/4 of an inch. So this is actually where it's going to finish. There's no elastic allowance up here because this is fold over elastic. So let's put the hook and eyes up next to this. And if you can, oh, you can't see it. Let me move you over. So if you can see, oh, it's black, so that's hard to see. This is going to land right on top of a hook, and that's not really a good place for us to be trimming the hook and eye allowance. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move this down. This is halfway between where the hooks are, or the eyes actually. And I'm going to adjust the height at the back here, because you don't want this to end right on a hook. That would be hard to cut. You can't really cut through the hooks or the eyes. So we want it to be halfway in between. So I'll adjust the height at the back here, and I'll just blend it in like that. If you have a French curve ruler, you might want to use it there as well. Just be sure that this is perpendicular to the center back. Okay, I'm going to move you back up here, and we're going to add in our seam allowances. So since we were smart and we indicated where we needed to add in our seam allowances, I'm going to add in 1/4 of an inch. That didn't mark on. If you're worried about making sure these pattern pieces match, you can add in some extra notches. Looks like my line didn't get drawn in there. And we're going to add seam allowance at the center front. If you're going to make lace overlays, you want to be sure that your lace is wide enough to cover the piece. This piece is going to just be covered with lace, this side front now. So I'm going to lay my lace on top and make sure that, yes, it is wide enough to cover the pattern piece. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to trace this new piece for the center front, and we're going to play with the lace placement on it and see what we like. So I'll be back after I trace my pattern piece. Okay, so I've traced off the center front pattern piece, and now I'm going to put my lace over the top, and let's see what sort of lace placement that we like. I want it to be sort of at an angle and then have this part be uncovered. So I think I like it like that. So I'm going to mark the lowest points of the lace. So I have this sort of aligned at the notch here, the notch that's already there. This is another low point. And we're just going to connect those lines until they run into the center front. So this is going to be the lace overlay, oops, not lave, lace overlay. And we're going to get rid of this part. We don't need to add any sort of seam allowance because this is going to be the scalloped edge of the lace. And this is going to be the low point of the lace. Lobel, if you want to call it that. The last pattern piece we're going to alter is this front lace overlay for D and E, but we're not going to use it for lace. We're going to use this to make a cut and sew foam cup. Now, if you already watched my pattern hack for the sports bra hack for the Delvine Bralette, you'll be familiar with what we're going to do. We're going to change the dart into a princess seam. It'll just be easier to put these foam pieces together with zigzag if it's two separate pieces. So we're going to take the top of the dart and just continue it in a line upwards. You're not really going to see this except on the inside of the bra, so it doesn't have to be perfect. Just continue it up. And now we're going to cut away the dart. So let's cut these pattern pieces apart. Start on the legs of the dart and continue up on that line that we just drew. If you end up with any weird points, just smooth it out. I'm going to get rid of the dart. So we're going to cut these pieces out of the foam, and when we sew them together, we're just going to butt the ends together and use a 3-step zigzag to join the pieces of the foam like that. So we don't need to add any seam allowance there, but let's indicate that this is for foam. And we also have the cut pieces. I'm using B and C. You could use the other cut pieces that are just the solid front. This has the keyhole cut out. And we don't need to make any changes to it, so just leave that piece as is. Now let's get everything cut out. I was just cutting out all the pattern pieces, and I realized that we didn't talk about lining the cradle. One of the fabrics I didn't show you in the beginning was this sheer cup lining. This is a stabilized tricot, and we're going to use this to line the cradle. The dazzle fabric does have stretch to it, so we need to add a stabilizing layer so that it doesn't stretch. And let's talk about the labeling of the front and side front pieces. These pieces had the most changes to them. So I've relabeled them. We're going to call this piece the center front piece. We're going to cut 2 out of the self, which is the dazzle fabric, and we're going to cut 2 out of the lining, which is the stabilized tricot that I just showed you. And this is the side front piece. This is also going to be a cut 2. We're going to cut 2 the self, the dazzle fabric. We're going to cut 2 of the lace because the lace covers this entire piece, whereas there's a separate overlay piece for this center front. And we're also going to cut 2 of the lining, the stabilized tricot fabric. And my pattern piece happened to get cut off right on this line for showing the direction of the stretch. If yours got cut off in an awkward way, just redraw it with a ruler on both pieces so that you know when you go to cut out your fabrics what direction the stretch should be. And I'll just show you the back band piece here. I had adjusted the height for the hook and eyes so that they don't get cut off in an awkward place. Maybe I can show you a little bit better now. When we attach, where this elastic fold line is going to be, it's going to be right between the 2 eyes. And then we have our front overlay piece. So let's put it on top of the center front piece. It's going to be like that when they go together. This is also going to be a cut 2, and we have our lace edge along this straight line. And then we have the foam pieces that we did earlier, and the front pieces, which have no alterations.